So as I mentioned earlier, we're doing something a little different today. It's called Q&A without a net. And that is, I'm just fielding your questions, raise a hand and do that. And one of the reasons for that is just to, one, I try to get a sense of what's on your minds, a sense of what the community wants to hear about and needs to hear about, but there's always something that's out there that I just don't get to address in a month or in a year, and so I want to hear that. But the other reason is just to emphasize the importance of questions and to take meaningful time in this service to do that, because what you just heard there are examples of how important questions were to Jesus. Those were 4 questions that were posed to him. He answered all 4 questions with another question. Not to be a jerk, right? He's not trying to be a jerk there. He's trying to point out that things aren't as simple as we try to make them. Jesus tries to have us think more broadly, more deeply. Like when the 2 disciples, asked that question, we want you to do whatever we ask. What kind of trouble would you be in if you just said, sure, I'll do whatever you ask, right? He was smart enough to say, well, what do you want, right? And then with the last one with Pilate, Pilate's like, so are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus is like, is that you talking? Or has someone planted a thought in your head, right? Things to not just simply answer the question. Jesus asked 300 questions, over 300 questions in the 4 Gospels. Jesus was asked over 180 questions in the Gospels. Depending on how you look at an answer, he only answered 8 to 10 of those 180 questions without a question. That's how much he was trying to challenge people to think, to not just take the surface answer to do that. So that was me just basically buying you all time to think of a question if you haven't yet, right? So does anybody have a question? It can be literally about anything that's on your hearts, it's on your minds. It can be about faith. It can not be about faith. It can be anything you want. And that's a nervous thing for a pastor. Yes. So the question was, what happened to the raven? Because before the dove went out, a raven was sent out. So we know at some point the raven survived because there were 2 ravens, and if one of the ravens died, we wouldn't have ravens today, right? So according to the story. So one of the traditions is that eventually later the raven came back, or that the raven had found dry ground, but because it wasn't selfless like the dove, just because in biblical teaching, animals have different representations, and the raven is a more considered a more selfish bird than the dove. So the idea is that it may have just stayed away and not come back to deliver the message that there was dry ground out there.
Where is God when somebody is sick?
What a fantastic question. Where is God when somebody is sick? So there's a question behind that question. And the question behind that question is this: is God absent because they're sick? Right? And a lot of people believe that if you have enough faith, you won't get sick. Like this is taught widely and broadly, and it just isn't so. It rains on everybody. The sun shines on everybody, the good, the bad, the people who are behaving fantastically, the people who are behaving poorly. But when you are ill, who has an answer for where God is when you're ill? Right there with them. Right there with them. Right beside, inside, working on that person, helping that person to be able to deal and persevere with whatever that illness is. The person doesn't have the illness because God has withdrawn. The person isn't dirty when they have an illness. And that's part of the challenge that has been presented in the world, particularly with mental illness, that there is something fundamentally wrong, and God has withdrawn, and this is a punishment, and this is not how God works. To me, God is never away, but God is never closer than when you need God most. Yes? How can you learn more about Jesus if you can't make Bible studies on Wednesdays anymore? What does anybody here think are other ways to learn about Jesus? Read the Bible. What else? Sorry? Meditation. What else? Prayer. Yep. Doing things. Doing things. Jesus is constantly asking us to do things. Selfless acts for people who can't help us in return. Not because we are going to do something and we're doing something as a favor for somebody else, which we then expect to get something in return for that, but to do things for people just because it's the right thing to do. To do things for the world just because it's the right thing to do. That's more important than Bible study. I'm not trying to undermine the attendance in my own Bible study, right? But if you had to choose between coming to Bible study to learn about Jesus or going to places where people are hurting and helping them, you're going to learn more about Jesus. You're going to see the face of God. You're going to see God in the eyes of the people who you are helping. And so not only are there other ways to learn about Jesus other than Bible study, I would encourage you that if you had the choice between coming to Bible study or going somewhere and helping somebody, that would be the fastest path to understanding Jesus. Yes?
Why does God allow injustice to prevail?
Does anybody know what one of the definitions of having the greatest power is? Or one of the traits of demonstrating you have the greatest power is? Not using it. Not using it. The greatest demonstrations of power don't come from using that power. They come from having the ability to use that power and sometimes not. We cannot have free will in the world and have God make everything okay. Right? God has given us, and we could talk about this for a year, right? Like I could do a sermon series for a year on that topic alone, and so I know this is going to be a little short because that deserves a lot of time. But the bottom line is this: God has given us all of the tools we need to eliminate injustice in this world. Right? God has given us all the power to have justice in this world. We simply choose to not have it because we have abandoned the ways that we have been guided towards and have decided that there are better ways, more selfish ways, ways of the world that are somewhat innate, right? That we have to work, we have to resist against these desires that are embedded in us. I want more, I want this, and in order to have this, I'm going to have to take away from somebody else, and then suddenly someone doesn't think that's injustice. Suddenly it's just, I just want more, and suddenly by following what we're told in America that just follow the economy and do this and do all that, and you're going to be great, and suddenly you have something that's fundamentally unjust because it's built on someone trying to make sure they have more, and the only way that ends up happening, or often the way that ends up happening, is by putting other people down.
I would be interested in your views of heaven and who gets there and who doesn't.
See, this is why I shouldn't do this. That is one of the fundamental questions of our faith. And I question the majority view of Christianity on this point. I don't believe that only people who profess Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior get into heaven. I do not believe this is the only way to be able to get there. I absolutely believe it exists. I absolutely believe it exists. And there are a number of reasons for that, some theological, some personal experience, and I'll share one brief story with you about that. But I believe anybody has the ability to get there, right? It can't be just about Jesus. There are too many people who never hear about Jesus. Right? There are too many people who, before Jesus was born, had no idea. It can't be about that. Nor do I believe it's God as accountant, right? Where you do X, Y, and Z, and there's this big board up there, right? There's this God board up there, and it said, well, Tiara did pretty well with Ace, but on the negative side, right? And then there's some addition thing, and it says, oh, made it, you didn't make it. It's not fundamentally like that. To me, right? I haven't been, right? So these, like you said, what's your opinion? This is my view on this. I believe anybody who wants to go can. I also believe there are some people who fundamentally do not want to go. That there's some people who they are, wanting to be in heaven would be incompatible with who they have become. And they will be given a choice to try to learn even after death. Who says learning ends after this body is gone and our consciousness and the spirit and who we essentially are continues? Who says the learning stops there? Or the opportunities stop there? Right? But I do believe strongly, if anybody wants to look more into this, there's a book called The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, which does a masterful job on this topic. And if anybody's interested, I can get you a copy if you want a copy, or I'll give you the name again. But The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis does a masterful job on this topic. So bottom line, I believe anybody who wants to go can. Not everybody wants to go. My son, Garrett, when he was about two-ish, I might get corrected on that when they watch the video later by my son or by my wife, but he's about 2. And we were in his room. We heard him talking. And my mom had died when he was about 9 months old. Never really, he got to know her, but not particularly well. And he was chatting away, and we went in and said, "Hey, Garrett, how you doing?" He's like, "Hi." He's like, "Who are you talking to?" "Grandma." He didn't really get to know Grandma. Like, we didn't talk about these things. We didn't talk about, hey, you have the ability to do this. I was still deep in my corporate career. I wasn't talking about these things. And we're like, oh, is she here now? And he said, well, she just was, but she's not now since you opened the door. Right. Does she visit often? Every once in a while. There was nothing we said. There was nothing in his age and everything else. There was just nothing about that other than there being some kind of connection. Do I think she was there flying around the room? I don't. Right? But was there something there so real, so connected? And children are particularly connected to these kind of things. Right? As we get older, it gets harder to hold on to this stuff. But that and a number of other things that have happened in my life have me 100%, not 99.9999, 100% convinced that the afterlife exists. What it looks like, I don't know, but I know it's good. There's some people who don't feel worthy enough, don't think they're going to deserve that. And that's one of the things about grace. It's one of the reasons why we emphasize this so much and we say it every week at the beginning, no matter who you are, no matter what you have done, no matter what has happened to you, if you're looking for that love, if you are looking for that grace is there for you, that love, that forgiveness. And that is why we have to tell people. It's not because we want to grow the number of people in the church. It's because it is inherently selfish to not tell people about this amazing thing, that if they are hurting, we can help them, that there's something to help them.
One of my friends be telling me, like, my dad be at my apartment. Or, like, sometimes my grandma may visit my mom's house or something like that.
How does that happen? Yes. So the question is, when someone dies, how is it that someone is still around? Has anybody ever been to a memorial service or to anything where someone has been cremated? Right? And see the ashes? Right? You know, typically in a box or an urn or something. And when I have one of these services, one of the things I'll say is, I'll put the box up in the air and say, does this look like your loved one? Right? Is this the sum total of what your loved one is? There has to be something more, right? Of you, who you are, when that body is reduced, there has to be something more, because something has to make that work. Something has to make that work. There is something beyond just these physical things and stuff, connective tissue and things that make us alive, that make us who we are. And so if we have that, right? If we have that and you believe that and you see that, and I see that all the time, there are some people who say that they experience someone reaching out to them, right? When my grandmother died, the way I found out about that is I was asleep and my grandmother approached in my dream and said goodbye. Woke up the next morning, mother came up to me and said, your Nana's died, right? These things happen, and they don't happen for everybody, and it's not that you're doing anything wrong if someone doesn't come and say hello or goodbye. It's not like that. I don't know how that works. I don't know how that works, but it does. But it does. One more question, and then get going, and then I will hear from you later whether you liked this or didn't like this, and whether we will ever use it. Any other questions? David?
Is it me, or is watching this young, loving family here make you feel a little better about the future of the planet and about society? Just loving the wonderful, and that child there, I don't believe that child is going to have a self-worth problem. I just wanted to say that.
So the question, this is the question to, right? That is the answer. And the question was, does being with this family, does seeing this family, does seeing Ace, to make you feel better? Make you feel more hopeful for the world? Right? Does it make you feel more hopeful? Think about those things. Follow those things. What are those things in your life or in the world out there that give you hope? Think about that. Ask yourself that question. What is it in this world that gives you hope? Because we need a double dose or a triple dose or quadruple dose of hope right now. At least I do. I can't speak for all of you. I don't know if you all need that or not, but I hear from a lot of people that we could use more hope right now. So my question for you is this: how can you ask yourself questions about your faith? How can you build that confidence to ask questions of God? How can you trust the questions? Because I can promise you, from Jesus' example, from the Bible's example, time and time and time again. Even though many people have been told the questions aren't good in faith, the question is more important than the answer. The right question is more important than any answer. So I ask you to think of ways that you can ask more questions about your faith, about your relationship with Jesus, about your feelings with the Holy Spirit, and then what that can do for your life and the world. Amen?